Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Just give me 1 minute. Okay. Uh, last time we started with the book of Numbers, and we looked at few things. Number one, we looked at what is the name of the book, how the book was called as the book of Numbers, because there are two senses that happens in this book. That's why this book is called as the book of Numbers. But in the Hebrew, the book name is In the Wilderness, and we saw why the book is called as In the Wilderness, because those are the starting words of that book. And in Hebrew, whatever are the first starting words of the book, that becomes the title of the book. So Genesis becomes In the Beginning, and here Numbers is In the Wilderness, because that's how the book started. Then we looked at the census itself, and we looked at the numbers, and we saw that the number of men in the first census was this first census was 603,550, and in the second census it was 601,730. So if you look at these numbers, in the second census the number had decreased. It had reduced by around 1,800, 1,820 something, around that number. But why is it significant? Because when we look at how God dealt with Israelites, we can see that when Jacob went into Egypt, the whole family was, the total number of people in the group that went to Egypt was 70. And in 400 years, they became close to 20 million people. So God was blessing them and God was increasing them. In 400 years, they became a very large nation out of 70 people. Now, these two censuses were taken 40 years apart. The first census was of the people who came out of Egypt. Then they rebelled against God. God punished them, and they all died in the wilderness. And in the second census, it is their children who are being counted. So in this 40 years, there is no growth in the number of Israelites. They are roughly the same. So we saw that God was not really blessing them. Okay. He was just being patient with them, but they were not being blessed. They were not being fruitful. They were being provided for, they were being looked after, but they were not really very fruitful. So we saw that. And we saw that why they could not get into the promised land. Then we saw how they traveled. Why this? There is another name that we saw that we could give this book. This book can be called as the Book of Journeys or Book of Wanderings, because in this book, a lot about their travel is mentioned, how they traveled from Egypt all the way to Promised Land and all their wanderings in the desert. A lot of it is mentioned in the Book of Numbers. So we can look at it and we can call it as the Book of Journeys. And I also showed you how the book, in when we read the Bible from Exodus, we can see at what point when God was talking to them and at what point they were traveling, which chapters deal with them being at one place and which chapters they are actually traveling. So we saw that, and we looked at the time period as to when they began to travel to the promised land. So I thought that it is not very clear in the way I would have told how they traveled. So I put again a chart to see or to show part of their travel. Okay. And we will read some verses. So in this, if you can see it, I have created a table, and this is in sequence of how the Israelites traveled up to Mount Sinai, where they received the 10 commandments, the law from God. Okay. This is not the full travel all the way to the promised land. This is just up to Mount Sinai and the incidents that happen. So we need to remember, to understand the timeline, we need to remember the calendar they are following. So let's read Numbers chapter 33, verse 3. Can we read that? Numbers chapter 33, verse 3.
The Israelites set out from the Ramesses on the 15th day of the first month, the day after the Passover. They marched out boldly in full view of all the Egyptians.
Yeah, so they traveled on the 15th day of the first month. So I have given on the first column the year, and the second column is the month, and what is the event, and then the verse. So first year, first month, they started from Egypt. Okay, they have started to travel from Egypt. They are going out of Egypt. This is right after they have celebrated Passover. They got up hastily and they had to travel. Now, then they travel and they reach the Red Sea. We know that, right? They reach the Red Sea and they cross the Red Sea. When did this happen? Okay, there are different numbers. Some numbers say that right within 3 days they reached the Red Sea. Some numbers say they took 7 days to reach the Red Sea. Okay, so there are different numbers. So we'll just put it as first or second month they reached the Red Sea and they crossed. In Exodus chapter 14, we can read that. We know the whole story, how they crossed the Red Sea. Okay, then after crossing the Red Sea, all the company of Israel, they all worshipped God because God had given them a big deliverance. He had delivered them from the Egyptians. They worshipped God with song and dance, and they worshipped God. Then they moved forward and they reached a place called Mara. Okay, and there they grumbled because there was no water. Then after that, they traveled further. They reached another place called as Elim. All this is given in Exodus chapter 15. Then in after that, they reach a place called as the wilderness of Sin or Zin. Different spellings are there, S-I-N or Z-I-N, or Shur. There's another name. So let's read Exodus chapter 16, verse 1.
And they took the journey from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came unto the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after the departing out of the land of Egypt.
On the 15th day of the second month, they reached the wilderness of Sin, okay, which is between Sinai and Elim. So second month, after starting from Egypt, in the second month, they reached in the wilderness of Sin. There they have grumbled, and there after that they traveled to Rephidim. Rephidim, they again grumbled for water. They had a battle with Amalek. You will remember the story where Moses had to hold his hands up, and whenever his hands go down, uh, Joshua would be losing the battle. And when his hands are up, Joshua would be winning the battle. So this battle happens in this place, in a place where called as Rephidim. So where is this? This is roughly in the second month. When do they arrive at the Mount Sinai? Read for me Exodus chapter 19, verse 1. Exodus chapter 19, verse 1.
In the third month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they unto the wilderness of Sinai.
So it says the third month, but in some translations it says on the third new moon after they traveled. So basically, it comes on the fourth month after traveling for 3 months. At the beginning of fourth month, they reach Mount Sinai. Okay, so this timeline we have to remember. They started from Egypt. They had different experiences. For 3 months, they were traveling and camping, traveling and camping. Finally, they reached Mount Sinai. And here at Mount Sinai, they are there for few more months. Then they don't travel. They are camped around Mount Sinai. So what all happens at Mount Sinai? God appears and comes down on the mountain. He gives the law. Moses goes up on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. God speaks to him. At the end of it, at the base of the mountain in the camp, people already created the golden calf and started worshipping. Moses is angry, God is angry, there is punishment for the Israelites. Then God calls Moses once again up on the mountain. He spends another 40 days and 40 nights up on the mountain. God gives him the new stone tablets, okay, and gives the instructions about the tabernacle. Okay, all this is happening at the Mount Sinai. They have not traveled after this. They are at Mount Sinai. We studied about the tabernacle and all the things related to tabernacle. Where are these instructions happening? At Mount Sinai. Moses constructs the tabernacle. Where is it happening? At Mount Sinai. They haven't gone any other place. They are at Mount Sinai. So how long were they at Mount Sinai? Let's look at Exodus chapter 40, verse 1. Exodus chapter 40, verse 1.
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, On the first day of the
Kept
first
doing that from
month,
here. And that on mute, it starts to get ready. And they
Okay. One of you read. Can you read?
and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, On the first day of the first month shalt thou set up the tabernacle of the tent of the congregation.
First day of the first month. Okay. Now, which year? Starting of the second year. So the tabernacle is set up. The construction is done. Moses dedicates the tabernacle when? Starting of the second year. First day, first month, second year, Moses dedicates the tabernacle. When is the first census done? We spoke about the census when the first generation is being counted. Numbers chapter 1, verse 1. Can we read that? Numbers chapter 1, verse 1. Somebody read, Joash, Numbers chapter 1, verse 1.
And the Lord spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tabernacle of the congregation, on the first day of the second month, in the second year after they were come out of the land of Egypt, saying,
Okay. First day of the second month, God tells Moses to take the census. Moses dedicates the tabernacle on first day of first month. Okay. So on 1st January, Moses dedicates the tabernacle. On 1st February, God speaks to Moses and says, take a census. And they take the census, and on Numbers chapter 10, verse 11, if we read, it says on the 20th day of the second month, they left Sinai. So 20th February, they left Sinai. So if I give in our calendar, 1st January 2023 is the first day of the first year. So 15th January 2023, people left Egypt. Then on 1st January 2024, Moses dedicated the tabernacle. 1st February 2024, God said to Moses, take a census. They did the census. On 20th February 2024, all the people packed up and started towards the promised land. So if you can remember this in our calendar, in our months, it will be easy to, put the timelines, what happened and when it happened. So they were in Sinai for 8 to 10 months. They were in Sinai. So what were they doing? God had given them the law. This was completely new to the people of Israel. They had never had the law. They didn't know all these things. They were being taught on how to walk with God. So it is during this time God gave the law. God gave the instructions to the Levites how to handle the tabernacle. And all these instructions were given, all the people were taught. And finally, after all these things are done, then they start to go to the promised land. Then they are ready to go and take the promised land. So right after they moved out of Egypt, God did not take them directly to the promised land and say, just take over. He didn't do that. He brought them to Mount Sinai. He made them stay there for quite a long time. For a few months. He gave them the law. He gave them the instructions. He taught them how to walk with God. And then when they were ready and when they understood everything, they had made the tabernacle and God could come down and dwell among them. Then they became ready to go and take the promised land. And then they started. So that's what we read in Numbers chapter 10, verse 11. That is when they started to go to the promised land. I hope this sequence is understood. And this is just the first generation. All right. So if we go forward, we can also see that this is also called as the book of murmurings, because people complained. In this book, we see a lot of murmurings. Why did the people? So many times people rebel, people complain, God punishes, and then they repent. All these things are mentioned in detail in the book of Numbers. Okay, so one of the things is that Christian life is also a journey. Okay, like the people journeyed from Egypt to the promised land, and all the difficulties and the things they faced in their journey, we can take a look at it and we can also learn what kind of difficulties we might face in our Christian walk and what is the attitude we need to show when we face these difficulties. What is the thing that pleased God? What are the things that displeased God? We can look at it. This is as an example for us to learn. So the book of Numbers is given for that reason. We'll come to that. Now, little bit about the murmurings. What is murmuring and why God hates it so much? Okay. Murmuring is when you speak, when you grumble. We don't have the ability to fight back. We don't have the strength to do anything. So what we do, we sit quiet. We don't act. We don't do anything because we can't resist. But from inside, the complaints will start coming. From inside, we will murmur. So murmuring is rebellion. Murmuring comes from discontent. When the people were not happy, they couldn't fight God, so they complained. Okay, so that complaining, that grumbling, that discontent with what God has done for them, that is viewed as rebellion, and that's why God hates it. But we read in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6, okay? Godliness with contentment is a great gain, okay? The discontent within our hearts brings murmurings and rebellions, but God says godliness with contentment, that's a great gain, okay? So we will quickly look at the different things the people rebelled. uh, Exodus chapter 15, verse 24, they rebelled at Mara, right after crossing the Red Sea, right after worshiping God and saying, our God is an awesome God, our God is a warrior, and praising God with dance and everything. Right after that, they rebel or they murmur because they did not get water. The water was bitter. In Exodus chapter 16, verse 2 and 3. Can we read that? Exodus chapter 16, verses 2 and 3.
And the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said unto them, Would to God we have died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when he served by the flesh pots, and when he did eat bread to the full. For ye have brought us forth into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger.
Yeah, stay on that chapter, Joash. One more verse we have to read. So in meat, they grumbled because they did not get meat. Okay, they were not happy with the provision which God had given, and they grumbled. But it says they grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and they wished that they were dead, they had died back early. Exodus chapter 16, verse 8. What does it say? Exodus chapter 16, verse 8.
And Moses said, This shall be when the Lord shall give you in the evening flesh to eat, and in the morning bread to the full. For the Lord heareth your murmurings, which ye murmur against him. And what are we? Your murmurings are not against us, but against the Lord.
So Moses says, you are not murmuring against us, you are murmuring against God. So all murmurings are against God. Okay, God looks at it as it's something done against him. Okay, so these people uh, murmured because they did not have meat. Another thing to notice, which I have not put here, but most of the time the murmurings came, or many times the murmurings came from the foreigners who had joined themselves with Israelites when they traveled outside or when they escaped from Egypt. They saw the wonderful works of God. They said, we will follow this God, and they went with the Israelites. And these people, they created a lot of trouble. So we can understand why in the New Testament God says, do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. Okay, it will create problems. But anyways, the next murmuring happens in Exodus chapter 17, verse 3. Can we read that? Or it is at Rephidim. Read Exodus chapter 17, verse 7.
And he called the name of the place Massa and Meribah, because of the chiding of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, Is the Lord among us or not?
And here we see they tested the Lord. They tempted the Lord. Jesus rebukes Satan during the temptations and says, do not test your Lord, your God. Okay. And we see that the people of Israel did exactly that. They tested the Lord at Rephidim. Again, because they had different problems there. Now, we can look at different things. One more thing, Numbers chapter 14, verse 1 to 3. Now here they spied out the promised land. Now they come to know that there are giants there, and now they are again not very happy. Numbers chapter 14, verse 1 to 3.
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they turn and encamp before Pihahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, over against Baal-Zephon, before it shall ye encamp thee. For
No,
Pharaoh will say of the children of
Numbers chapter 14, Numbers.
And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, and the whole congregation said unto them, Would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God we had died in this wilderness? And wherefore had the Lord brought us unto this land to fall by sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey? Were not better for us to return into Egypt?
So this is after spying the promised land. They are again complaining. There are giants. So they are grumbling because of the enemies that they are seeing. Okay. But if you look at Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 and 2, can we read that? It may not be precisely what I want to, the words. It's that word is present in Amplified Bible. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 to 2. You can read, Joash. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 to 2.
Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witness, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God.
Okay. So it says, looking unto Jesus, we have to run the race. Okay. Not at the difficulties we face. The Israelites were looking at the giants. They were not looking unto God. In Amplified Bible, it says, looking away unto Jesus. Look away unto Jesus. So you look away from your problem and look unto Jesus. And there you will have your victory. Okay. So the people of Israel, they looked at the giants. They did not look at God, and therefore they grumbled. Now, there are few more things that are there, but you get the idea about what all grumblings they did. In Numbers chapter 16, the people grumbled against the leadership. And they were not ordinary people, they were the chiefs. Okay, they were the leaders among the people. Those people rebelled against Moses and Aaron, and God judged them. And when God judged them and punished them, the people grumbled again. Let's read that. Numbers 16, verse 41. Numbers 16, verse 41.
But on the morrow, all the congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, saying, Ye have killed the people of the Lord.
So God punished the people because they rebelled against him and they died. Now rest of the people are again grumbling against Moses and Aaron, saying that you killed those people. You are responsible for their death. So this grumbling never seems to stop. Whatever God does or whatever God is providing, they are just not happy. And they just keep on complaining. And God is tremendously patient with them, but God also gets very annoyed with them. So this is something we need to remember. They traveled and they had serious problems. It was not that it was a smooth travel. They had difficulties and they had real difficulties. They did not have water. They did not have food. They had the heat, the weather. They had enemies who attacked them. They had war, battles they had to win. So they had problems. But at every stage, God provided for them. But they were just not happy because of the problems, because of the hardships. They were not looking at the provision which God had given them. They are only looking at the hardships and they wanted an easy way out and they couldn't get it. And so they kept on complaining. So this something similar can happen in our lives too. And Paul warns us about that. Paul warns us about very specifically about taking these murmurings which we all read about. And Paul warns us. So let's read 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 to 12. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 to 12.
Moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant how that all of us were under the cloud and all passed through the sea and were all baptized with Moses Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and did all drink the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that flowed them, and that rock was Christ. But with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things were our examples, to the intent we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted, neither be ye idolaters, as as were some of them, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink, and rose up to play. Neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed and fell in one day 23,000. Neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted, and were destroyed of serpents. Neither murmur, yea, as some of them also murmured, and were destroyed of the destroyer. Now all these things happen unto them for ensamples, and they were written for the admonition upon whom the ends of the world are come. Wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall.
So we read about all the murmurings that we just went through in Numbers and Exodus. Paul is listing them here, and he says that let's not be like them. Okay, what all he mentions. Okay, verse 5 says God was not pleased with them. So what kind of people they were? In 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 15, Paul says to Timothy, do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed. Okay, so Paul is telling Timothy, be a person who need not be ashamed before God. Okay, but with these people of the Israelites, God was not pleased. God was not happy. So they were people, they were servants who will be ashamed before God. Okay, God was not pleased with them. Verse 6 says, these things happened as examples for us so that we would not crave evil things as they craved. Okay, they craved for things even though God was providing for them. So if you look at them, their clothes, their sandals, they were miracles. Okay, it says, we know in Psalms, it says their clothes did not tear, their sandals did not wear off. But some people, some scholars say it was not just that the sandals did not wear off, but the sandals also grew as the people grew, their feet. So you can imagine in 40 years, how many different sizes of clothes people would need, how many different sizes of sandals people would need. So God provided for that. It did not wear off, but they were not happy. They took it as granted. Oh, these things do happen. Okay, what's the big deal? It will happen. Okay, because they got used to it. Verse 7 says they became idolaters. Verse 8 says they did immorality. Verse 9 says they tested the Lord. Verse 10 says they grumbled. And further it says, it is given to us so that we should know how we need to stand. We need to take heed. Are we standing rightly before God? And are we walking correctly before God? So these are the reasons why Paul takes all these examples of the walk of the journey of Israel in the wilderness, and he applies it to our Christian life and our walk with Christ. And he says, don't be like them. Okay, God was not pleased with them. Don't do what they did. Okay, and he says they were baptized unto Moses. They escaped from Egypt. So we also need to remember, we are also baptized. We have also come out of sin, but it is still possible that God may not be pleased with us, with what we are doing and how we are walking with him. And there are other verses in Hebrews chapter 3, verse 7 to 12. You know that it says, today, if you hear my voice, do not harden your hearts as when they provoked me. That verse we know. Okay. It says, take care, brothers and sisters, that there will not be in any one of you an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. Again, they took the Israelites in the wilderness and says they had an evil, unbelieving heart that fell away from God. These are baptized people walking with God, cloud in the day, fire in the night, Moses as their leaders. But the testimony is they have evil, unbelieving heart, and God is not pleased with them. Okay. Jude 1 verse 5 says, subsequently God destroyed those who did not believe. So it's a warning against unbelieving heart. Okay. Hebrews chapter 4 verse 8 to 12. Okay, I'm just giving the reference because we have run out of time. We are not reading it. Hebrews chapter 4 verses 8 to 12, it says, if Joshua had given them rest, he would not have spoken of another day after that. Consequently, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For the one who has entered his rest has himself also rested from his works, as God did from his. Therefore, let's make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will fall by following the same example of disobedience. Whose example of disobedience? These people in the wilderness. Okay. Make every effort to enter the rest that God has provided for us, so that we will not follow their example and fall away. Okay, that we might be saved. Okay, that we might be able to enter the rest which God has given for us. Okay. Can I take 2 more minutes, Pastor? Okay. So I just want to give what is the central message of this book. Okay. So let's read Numbers chapter 9, verses 15 to 23. Numbers chapter 9, verses 15 to 23.
And on the day that the tabernacle was reared up to the cloud covered the tabernacle, namely the tent of the testimony, and at even there was upon the tabernacle as it were the appearance of fire until the morning. So it was always the cloud covered by day and appeared of fire by night. And when the cloud was taken up from the tabernacle, then after that the children of Israel journeyed, and in the place where the cloud abode, there the children of Israel pitched their tents. At the commandment of the Lord, the children of Israel journeyed, and at the commandment of the Lord they pitched. As long as the cloud abode upon the tabernacle, they rested in their tents. And when the cloud tarried long upon the tabernacle many days, then the children of Israel kept the charge of the Lord and journeyed not. And so it was when the cloud was a few days upon the tabernacle, according to the commandment of the Lord, they abode in their tents, and according to the commandment of the Lord, they journeyed. And so it was when the cloud abode even unto the morning, and that the cloud was taken up in the morning. Then they journeyed, whether it was by day or by night, that the cloud was taken up and journeyed, or whether it were 2 days or a month or an year, that the cloud tarried upon the tabernacle, remaining thereon. The children of Israel abode in their tents and journeyed not, but when it was taken up, they journeyed. At the commandment of the Lord, they rested in their tents, and at the commandment of the Lord they journeyed. They kept the charge of the Lord at the commandment of the Lord by the hand of Moses.
So the essence of this verses passage that we read is that the Israelites traveled only when the cloud lifted up. So there was the tent of the tabernacle, and over it was the cloud which had the presence of God, or the cloud was present. So during the day it was a cloud, but at night it would turn into a pillar of fire. Okay. So the cloud would lift up and start moving. And when the cloud starts moving, all the children, all the Israelites would pick up their tents, pack up, and start following the cloud. And there is a procedure and a process on how they did that. We will see that later. But this is the idea. When the cloud moves, the, the people of Israel will follow. When the cloud stayed still over the tabernacle, they would also camp there. And what was the thing is, they did not know when the cloud will lift up. That's why it says sometimes the cloud would lift up, stay in a place for one day, and next day morning it would lift up and start moving. Sometimes it would stay in one place for 2 days and then it would start moving. Sometimes for 1 month, sometimes for 1 year. Moses didn't know, Aaron didn't know, nobody knows when the cloud will move. They just have to be ready. And they just have to be ready. So they could rest when the cloud stopped, and they could move when the cloud moved. But they didn't know when the cloud would move. So they were always ready to move, but at the same time, they had their camp and everything set up. So what we can see in this passage, it gives a message. First is that we have to walk our Christian life with God's guidance. We don't go our own way. We move where God tells us to move, when He tells us to move. Okay. And for every problem that we see in the book of Numbers and in their travel, God always had a solution. God always had a deliverance. God always had a provision. So if we walk according to the guidance of God, we would always receive the provision from God. We would always receive the deliverance from God. So that is what we need to keep in mind when we are reading this book, of that pattern that happens over here. God provides, God guides, but we need to be obedient to that guidance of God. Okay, so this is the overview of the book. Next week, hopefully, we will go into the different sections of the book and how the people camped and how they moved, because that also is something very nice. It doesn't show up in the text, but when we put it in a picture, we see something really nice of how God arranged them. So hopefully next week I will be able to show you uh, God's arrangement of the tribes around the tent of the tabernacle. All right. So that is all I had for this week. May God bless you.